So let's talk about conditional statements. We've talked about comparisons, rendering out a true or false value. And a conditional statement, I like to think of conditional statements as gatekeepers, and that's why I have Gandalf here. You shall not pass. As he stood on the bridge and faced off the Balrog, he was a gatekeeper who protected the fellowship from the Balrog. Conditional statements allow for code to be executed under specific conditions. We can test to see whether or not those conditions are true or false, and then say, when this condition is true, then do the following items. We can have multiple conditions, as I just showed you. We can have multiple conditions that all must be met, multiple conditions that only one must be met. As I mentioned, I'm a bit of a nerd. I do like Lord of the Rings. And when I made these slides, I kind of got on a Lord of the Rings kick. Anyway, so cannot or shall not pass. As the image shows you, the book has only you cannot pass, and the movie has you cannot pass and you shall not pass. We can use if. We've seen that pretty straightforward. It's if this is true, render this code, else it's not true, render this other code. Well, what happens when we have multiple conditions that we need to check against? Not just conditions that both must be true, but even just multiple conditions of like this, where we have a variable called Gandalf said. If Gandalf said, you cannot pass, we know that the media involved here is the book. If Gandalf said, you shall not pass, then we know the media is the movie. If Gandalf said is neither of those items, right, then we know that we don't have Lord of the Rings, and we'll just say none, because that media doesn't exist. So there you go. So here we're checking against one condition, we're checking against a different condition, and if neither of those conditions are true, then it defaults to the else. When we have multiple conditions, the ampersand, ampersand, the and, Gandalf said 1, you cannot pass. Gandalf said 2, you cannot pass. Gandalf said 3, you shall not pass. Well, that actually falls in the first conditional statement. So you shall not pass. Media, we know, is the movie. Here's an else if. An else if basically says, hey, I want to check a different separate condition. More than likely, the two conditions you are checking would not exist at the same time. Let's say, for example, we have 50 states and we want to compare values for all those 50 states. We can write a big, long chain of conditional statements. If, else, else, else if, else if, else if, else if, for like 50 states. That's an awful lot of else ifs. And it does go through them in order. So a chain of if and else ifs, it matters what item is at the top. I like to put things that are the most rare at the top, conditions that are the most rare at the top, because then that way it'll catch those first, because it just reads from the top. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc., all the way down. So with the and condition, all conditions within the larger set of parentheses must be met. Okay, with or, there's shorter ways to write this, but here we go. If Gandalf said 1 is you cannot pass, and Gandalf said 2, you cannot pass, if that's true, then we know that we're dealing with Lord of the Rings. If it's not true, then we know we could skip all the way down. So let me go back here. So if Gandalf said 1, you cannot pass, and Gandalf said 2, you cannot pass. See this larger set here, alert, this larger else, see how it lines up with this F. If Gandalf said 1, you cannot pass, and Gandalf said 2, you cannot pass, then we know that it's Lord of the Rings. If either of those values was not true, then we would know that it's not Lord of the Rings. If Gandalf said 3, you cannot pass, or Gandalf said 3, you shall not pass, then we know it's Lord of the Rings, because either can be true. If Gandalf said 3 is not either of those values, then we know that it's not Lord of the Rings. Somebody tried to trick us because the first 2 were right. And you can have nested if statements like this one. Say, okay, I have a conditional statement that needs to be overall true in order for these other conditions to be checked as well. So you can do that. It's a bit complicated, but we'll be doing it in class a little bit. The ternary operator. So this is a shorthand if statement, and it's not something I expect you guys to know, but I want you to be aware of it because there will be times that you will see this out in the wild in the internet. You look at other people's code, you go, what the heck is this? You know, something question mark, what? So basically, it's here's my test or the condition. I'm asking a question. That's what all conditional statements are, is I'm asking a question. Is this true or is this false? So condition, question, if this is true, do the first part. If this is false, do the second part. So you can't, with a ternary operator, you can't get an else if statement. It has to be really short and concise. So we have a variable called good or evil, and it's currently set to the value of good. So I want to assign talking to let me know who I am talking to. So here's my assignment operator. I'm going to check to see is good or evil equal to good? See that question? Is good or evil equal to good? Right now it happens to be equal to good. So we know that we are talking to Smeagol because that's the first part of this equation, this before the colon, and then afterwards, if good or evil was anything other than good, then we can assume we are talking to Gollum. A switch statement. So remember I just talked about 50 states? Well, if you want to do a lot of comparisons, you can use a switch statement. So in this case, since there's not a lot of space on my slide, I just have 3. So we have 3 people who have bared the ring. And like the first option might be Gollum, right? And his thing was his ring, his words, right? His catchphrase, my precious, right? So we can say, hey, what is the current value of ring bearer? We're going to check. So here we're just checking to see what is the value of ring bearer. So it takes the word ring bearer, takes the variable ring bearer, and says, what is the value of ring bearer? That's why it uses this case. So it's almost like doing a if-else statement. If ring bearer is equal to Gollum, then we're going to assign the value of my precious to the variable ring. If it's Bilbo, then we'd assign what have I got in my pocket. And Frodo, get it off. And these little break statements right here between each of these are so that they don't run into each other. So it knows, the switch basically says, hey, I'm going to compare this value. I'm going to go through each of these case statements and find out which one is true. When I've found out which one is true, then it exits the switch statement, kind of like the if-else stuff. Once it's found what's true, then it exits out. And there's a default. You can use default for this also. So that's the switch statement. We'll be doing some of that in class as well.